think that's a really big part of it. Is there's so much dehumanization, there's so much negative, and that's a big part of what's around us. But the reason that it matters, like, why do we care if someone is being dehumanized? Well, we care, I think, because there's so much beauty in all people, in all groups of people. And so, we're not just focusing on the horrors of what's happening. I do like to be direct about that.
Sure. Don't want to gloss that over.
Yeah, don't want to gloss that over. But I also don't want to portray someone's identity as just the worst thing that's happening to them.
Right.
I also want to show you by amplifying their voices, because I can't speak for Uyghurs, right? I am not Uyghur, but I can amplify their voices by using their poetry and music.
Welcome to the Embracing Mystery podcast. Join us as we explore together ways that we can embrace creative and spiritual mystery in our lives and simultaneously find ourselves embraced in the mystery of compassionate, creative interconnection, held by what might be called the divine or source or consciousness or even mystery itself. In the process, we seek to become more fully ourselves, find our home in places of belonging, and grow as creative, spiritual, and relational beings.
Welcome to the Embracing Mystery podcast. We will be today exploring the interconnection of spirituality and creativity, which many of you are very familiar with as our main focus. But we'll also be talking about the interconnection of both of those things, spirituality and creativity, with, for want of a better term, concerns for social justice, social activism, connection with things that are going on in our world. We have a special guest, Adnan Hussain, whose own creative work really lives at that intersection between social justice and culture, and we'll be exploring that. He'll have a chance to introduce himself further as we go today. But as always, we're going to pause first and just bring ourselves into this space, and I will lead us in a brief practice. I'll ding our little bell here in a moment and really lead us today in a practice of just setting some intentions as we approach our time together. So get comfortable and settled wherever you are, and we'll begin. And just mentally, quietly, or if you prefer, out loud, take these phrases that I'm going to express as intentions and make them your own. I invite you to do that. I'm here. I'm aware. I'm listening. I'm open. And I am willing to respond. All right. Well, welcome again to our listeners. Welcome, Adnan, as well. I'm going to just do a bit of a preamble, a bit of an explanation of why we're covering this third element of today's topic: spirituality, creativity, and activism, social justice, concerns for those kinds of things. If you've been listening for any number of episodes, you know that we are always exploring spirituality and creativity and the intersection of those things. And by spirituality, we refer not just to any specific heritage or background, but the interspiritual experiences that many of us have and pursue, and the interspiritual nature of humanity. By creativity, we refer not just to the arts, although we certainly talk a lot about poetry and visual art and music and things that we normally consider the arts, but we really see both spirituality and creativity as essential parts of what it means to be human beings in every sphere of life. So not just religion and art as sort of categories and compartments of our lives, but really everything. And while for this podcast, we have never talked explicitly about things like social justice and activism, it is kind of implicitly embedded in the DNA of Table Collective. We talk about being an interspiritual community of creatives and contemplatives who are cultivating our creative, connected, compassionate lives and connection with mystery and all that might mean to different people. Well, connection and compassion already draw us to things that can express themselves in concern for and activism towards issues that we see in our world, human issues of justice and equality, the care of the environment that we're in, the world that we live in, even thinking more broadly of the cosmos to take us down a whole different road. So I think it's actually very natural to explore that. And one of the reasons that we've invited Adnan to join us is that that's really the intersection of these three things are very much part of his life. And so it just seems to make a lot of sense to have you with us today to explore these things in whatever way might naturally proceed in our conversations. And before I start launching into questions for us to discuss, would love for you to be able to introduce yourself a little more to us and to our audience. So Adnan, please, who are you?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you all for having me first. Appreciate being here. So as Kevin mentioned, my name's Adnan Hussain, and I work in animation. That's the main medium that I create my art in, and I love to tell stories. And I'll give you a bit of my background, kind of where did that begin from. And so I was born in the US, and at the age of 9, I moved to Pakistan with my family. And it was a big cultural shift, but one of the things that kind of kept consistent was that I was always writing stories from a young age. And, you know, when you're young, they're like these crazy adventure stories and things like the aspirations and things that you have. But it's, you know, it was a really great start to play with language, to understand kind of the nuance of working with words, and then creating little comics and stories. And, you know, inevitably the things that you are thinking about, the things you're experiencing come through in some way, shape, or form. And so growing up, you know, was a deep interest in kind of science fiction and fantasy, which is kind of maybe a way of escaping reality or looking upon reality in a different way that maybe is more manageable at times. Because even science fiction stories, you know, and fantasy stories, many times they'll take real world situations and ideas and express them in different ways. And so you have this whole mythology created around those concepts, but essentially they're human concerns that are generally, you know, the core of these stories. And so that was always something that really interested me. And in looking at kind of religion and the way that people interacted, that was something that I had to navigate a lot of growing up and moving around quite a bit. And so in the US as a kid, you know, facing racism and seeing these things firsthand, but also learning about incredible people like Dr. King, learning a little bit like at an elementary school level about the civil rights movement, and kind of thinking about it not just as this idea, but connecting it to both the positive and negative experiences of, you know, race relations, of being othered, and seeing people around you be othered for different reasons. You know, so those were ideas that were already kind of in my head, things that I was made to think about, I think maybe early on, and I was therefore then sensitive to. Moving to Pakistan, the thing that was really eye-opening was, you know, like growing up, you're in the US, you're thinking, okay, well, we are kind of a minority here, but going to Pakistan, I was part of the majority. But seeing the same types of challenges and beauty, in people there as well, seeing the othering of groups of people and immediately kind of having like a visceral reaction to it. Maybe not knowing how to articulate in words kind of why, but just knowing that it was something so kind of disgusting to see someone disparaged, or a group of people who might not be in the room disparaged. And, people would say, oh, but it's just a joke. But when you look at those jokes, you realize, well, that's how you're kind of dehumanizing a group of people. And so you're kind of creating categories. And, bigotry is not particularly creative. It tends to be the same kind of tropes and, assigned to any group of people. And so those were things that, along with, enjoying reading comics and playing and, all kinds of like fantastical ideas and things, those were things that I was thinking about and trying to understand. And so then when you start getting a little bit older and you start learning about really serious human atrocities, like learning about the Holocaust that the Jews faced, by the Nazis, and then learning about like the partition of India and the mass violence that occurred there, learning about like the Vietnam War and the injustice around that, and just really being horrified and thinking, okay, how is it that people living side by side can suddenly turn on each other and like exhibit such horrific violence when in general, it's like we're taught to be kind to people, we're taught to, not take things away from others, and yet for some reason it becomes okay, it becomes almost sanctioned if you've dehumanized a group of people to a far enough extent. And so those were the kinds of patterns that really made me think about the types of stories that I needed to tell. And the types of things that if you don't use them in some positive way, it just grinds you down.
Right.
And so finding an outlet in storytelling to say something about these things, and realizing that in doing so, you take something that is maybe very painful for you and you're able to transform that hopefully into something beautiful that also becomes a way of communicating to others and finding that mutual understanding in others.
Yeah. Thank you. I find it really interesting, just even in that narrative, you began from the interest in storytelling and creativity, therefore, and then briefly touched on kind of religious, spiritual things, and then came into your growing awareness of humanity and atrocities and justice issues, et cetera, and that brought you back into storytelling. Not brought you back, it's not like you left it, but in your narrative, it circled back then, which that's some of the thing that we really want to explore. And so thank you for that introduction. I think what I would like to do is actually, we want to explore all three of these areas. Spirituality, creativity, and for want of a better term, activism, social concern. Because we have spent less time in our podcast exploring that last one, that's actually where I would like our questioning and conversation to start. Now, we are already entering this conversation knowing that these things are all interlaced and woven together. And so our conversation might not move from one topic to the next, but I'm going to at least start us with this discussion of activism and social concern, and want all of us to be participating in that. But I'm going to start with a question for you. In our conversations leading up to doing this, I know that you have a particular interest in the plight and issues involving the Uyghur people, and that has a history to it, your own engagement. And I know you have other concerns as well, but maybe starting by concretizing this a little bit with the Uyghur as an example will help some of our listeners kind of get a sense of this. So maybe can you just talk briefly about how did you, because many people won't even know who the Uyghurs are, and how did that connection happen? What was going on, and just share a little bit about how that connection began, and then how your engagement with that is and was and has been going on.
Yeah, so the Uyghurs are a group of people of Turkic ethnicity, and they live in a province that is occupied by China. China refers to it as the Xinjiang province. The Uyghurs generally refer to it as the Uyghur Autonomous Region. And if you look at the map, it's actually a huge part of China. So if you look at Tibet and you look at Xinjiang, these are basically the majority as far as land masses of China. So I've always been into all different types of art. And so I would pick up, like in LA, we have so many different cultures, and even just going to bookstores from different communities is always a lot of fun. And I'll pick up either children's books to check out illustrators from a particular culture or art books. And I've always really loved Chinese watercolors. And so I picked up a lot of books from a store that used to be in Chinatown, in downtown here. And one of those books had some sort of Arabic script. And it wasn't Arabic, it wasn't Urdu, but there were these people who were clearly Muslim in terms of like their dress, and then looking at the writing and things. And I was intrigued by it. Now, all of this these books were in Mandarin, and so I wasn't able to read them. But I was very curious. But I didn't really even know what to look up to find out more information about that. I mean, there really was not an easy way to figure something out. Like you couldn't do an image search. You couldn't do like a Google Translate and things like that at that time.
At that time, yeah.
But, I love the art, and I was just curious. Like, I wonder who these people are. And so a few years later, some friends of mine that, we used to just do some music together for fun, they had this idea of a trip that they'd been wanting to do for a long time, a backpacking trip. And so these two friends had already planned out this trip, and they asked two of us who played music with them if we'd like to join. And so for me, that was a very easy opportunity to go do something amazing. And so I said yes. I mean, these were wonderful people that I knew had similar, I think, sensitivities and ideas and joy and love of culture and humanity. And so we went on a backpacking trip, and we started off in Shanghai in China, and we traveled across China. We went up to Mongolia and into Mongolia. Then we went down a bit south in China, and then we went across to the Xinjiang province. And then that trip also took us to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. And so this was like a 2-month, very grueling backpacking trip.
It's all on foot.
Well, yeah, I mean trains and buses, but that can be pretty grueling too.
Yeah.
And it's backpacking, so it's like whatever you could fit in your backpack is what you're carrying, and it's kind of heavy. But what was beautiful about that trip was, anytime like you go to a place, there can be discomfort, especially we were not doing like any kind of luxury travel. And so travel can be uncomfortable.
Sure.
It can be very challenging. And when you don't speak a language and you're not familiar with different cultures, maybe sometimes like first response that people can have is a negative response. Why isn't this, why aren't things done in a way that are normal to me and things like that. And so for us navigating that, we wanted to approach it in a way that was just open to we were there to enjoy what was different, and then that was something to be celebrated. And so as we traveled, we met all kinds of wonderful people as we were just like for fun playing music. I would sing with my friends. There were some songs that we had practiced, and we would do those. And it was a beautiful way of bridging language barriers and making the conversation not transactional, like, okay, I want to buy something. How much is that? Or how do I get to this place? That's usually the limit of your conversation when you don't have a common language. But you start to share something like music, and all of a sudden people are using hand gestures and a few like shared common words and struggling and trying to communicate with each other. And there's so many beautiful experiences that came out of that. And eventually when we got to Xinjiang, that was where we met the Uyghur people. And there was a museum that in Xi'an that is about celebrating the cultural diversity of China. China is a very diverse country. And although that museum was about celebrating that cultural diversity, I remember sitting in like the entrance of the museum after walking through it, And there were some young Uyghur, like teenagers, who just they wanted to practice their English, and so they were just chatting with us, and they were very friendly. And I remember a person who worked at the museum that was supposed to celebrate all of these diverse cultures, telling me all the usual negative, bigoted tropes that are used to dehumanize a group of people, and saying those about Uyghurs, and saying, don't, spend time with them, don't go to their part of town. And that really, made us feel upset. Obviously, we didn't react to this person. We understand, like, okay, you're in a place you're not familiar with. Don't start conversations that you really don't want to have. But it was something that obviously made us feel really disgusted, my friends and I. And so we were planning to anyway, but we went to like the Uyghur section of the town and spent time there, and just saw the beauty of people, just as we had seen of like the Han Chinese people. We saw like of the Uyghur people, and we played music with them, and kids came by and joined us. And, we just had a wonderful time in spending time with people. And then we met even more when we, went and traveled around Xinjiang. But we saw the way that people were being treated as second-class citizens, and people are not really able to openly talk about the things that they're going through, but you could see it. You could see the restrictions. You could see many of the challenges, even just at the surface level, even without knowing everything. You could see the signs of dehumanization that lead to essentially genocide. It's a road, and not every situation will reach that end, but there's a strong chance of it. And so just those experiences of seeing what people were going through, there was a desire in my mind to then do something about it and to figure out how, I might do that. So after returning, a few years later, I did a series of paintings about the beauty of the different cultures that we'd encountered, and just kind of sharing about dance and musicians from those cultures by doing paintings of these people, and doing a gallery show and doing storytelling around it. And Uyghurs were one of those groups that I wanted to showcase. And part of that process was reaching out to local communities. Now, at that time, the Uyghur community, rightfully so, didn't really have a good reason to engage with an outsider they didn't know, because there's so much surveillance, and there's more harm to be gained from that than good. And so I was also I tried to be mindful of that. So I reached out to people, but didn't push. I was like, if there's something that I can do to kind of raise awareness and help with kind of things that you might already be doing, let me know. And so at that time in 2011, or 2013 actually, the situation was already terrible, but it wasn't terrible enough to risk just talking to random outsiders like myself about it. But come to 2017, when people were suddenly being put into camps, large scale, right now, I think there's at least 1.9 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. And there's a huge movement of dismantling the culture and erasing it. And so I reached out again, and at that point, I was like, there isn't anything left to lose. And so I started making daily drawings about what was going on, but also celebrating the culture, also taking translations of poetry and illustrating that just on Instagram. And then I made a short film based on some of the human rights reports and the testimonies of people at the Uyghur Tribunal, which was basically Uyghurs testifying, people who had managed to get out, people who were able to give firsthand accounts of what Uyghurs were going through at the hands of the Chinese government. And so then I made a short film to illustrate that, to bring that to life. So taking basically academic work and testimonies and bringing them to life through animation to raise more awareness.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot there already. I'm wondering if this could be a spot where we've kind of asked for your connection of involvement and awareness of particular social issues and this particular trip, et cetera, and you've shared wonderfully how that fed back into creativity. It's interesting. It actually started with your interest in creativity because you were exploring art and you ended up in this store in Chinatown and you came across this thing. So it's all kind of woven in. But I wonder if Naz or Stephen, if just sharing our own as awareness of social issues and your own interests, concerns, et cetera, how has that taken shape in your own lives? I can certainly share in mine, but I'd rather hear from you all first if you have something that you want to contribute to that. And it can connect to spirituality, creativity as well, but yeah, thought I'd start there.
Well, there's something I noticed in what you were sharing, Adnan, like in the first kind of introducing yourself, you talked about storytelling and your creative work as a way of dealing with and I forget the exact language you use, but of wrestling with the feelings that come up of seeing people being othered, of seeing the injustice. And here at the end of this kind of telling of your interactions with the Uyghur community, seeing it functioning in almost an opposite way. Like, I'm sure it had a function and role for you internally and how you were dealing with that, but it was an awareness piece as well. And it sounds like essentially a degree of empathizing and a degree of rehumanizing those who are being dehumanized by pointing out aspects of their culture and translating and making that available. So I think I'll probably get back to myself somewhere here, but that's what I was struck by.
That's fine. It's a conversation. You can go wherever
as you
want.
were talking, was these different functions of creative work as it relates to justice. And for myself, I've realized more recently, I think in many ways, I haven't used it well for the first instance of processing my own stuff. And so often I don't know what to say or do because it's overwhelming, versus seeing that as an empowering element. Because like earlier in my life, like when I was in college, I was director of our human rights awareness group on campus. I was rah. I wanted to communicate all of it. And I think I got burnt out. But it was missing a creative piece of ways of metabolizing that, of wrestling with it, of it also missed the communication point that you had contacts. It sounds like you had ways to interact with people, and so the role of that in community, that of awareness that's not just separate from it, but of relationally connecting. So I think a lot of my life missed that, and I've recently been asking the question of how to re-engage that. So even as I'm listening to you, these are some of my takeaways of, okay, there's some key pieces here of what makes that not just doing it in isolation or doing it once with, or just being overwhelmed, like seeing it as a creative act as something empowering for yourself and for others.
To
rehumanize yourself, to not just get overwhelmed too. As you're rehumanizing them.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyways,
some really meaty things there. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Yeah. Naz, anything that you want to throw onto
through my mind right
table?
now?
Yeah.
I might jump in a little bit later. I think I have
of
to
course.
process things.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Just coming back to something, Stephen, that you said about the kind of, and you sort of said it almost like it was a realization in the moment of maybe I burn out because there wasn't a creative kind of way to channel that. And that, to me, that's just beautiful example of the interplay of why art, activism, and I think spirituality, being able to process these deeper things, are so important to keep integrated.
Well, and I'd be curious, as I was saying that, does that resonate with your experience, or was I reading it in ways that were not how you experienced that?
Thank you.
No, it does resonate with my experience, especially when you articulated it as kind of rehumanizing yourself. I think that's a really big part of it. Is there's so much dehumanization, there's so much negative, and that's a big part of what's around us. But the reason that it matters, like, why do we care if someone is being dehumanized? Well, we care, I think, because there's so much beauty in all people, in all groups of people. And so, we're not just focusing on the horrors of what's happening. I do like to be direct about that.
Sure. Don't want to gloss that over.
Yeah, don't want to gloss that over. But I also don't want to portray someone's identity as just the worst thing that's happening to them.
Right.
I also want to show you by amplifying their voices, because I can't speak for Uyghurs, right? I am not Uyghur, but I can amplify their voices by using their poetry and music. And so
Letting
I am
them
adding
speak.
to.
Yeah.
So I'm adding an interpretation to it, but I'm taking their direct words and putting that out there and amplifying those voices.
Yeah.
I think the process of connecting to people is a very important part of that.
Yeah.
And so for me, like after moving back to the US when I was like 17, then, I studied animation and started working at studios. And so about 10 years after moving back, there was, I had been exploring for a few years kind of my own personal connections to my culture and finding kind of those poets and writers whose work resonated with my kind of social conscience. And so there was a poet named Bulle Shah, whose work I really connected to. There's another poet named Shah Abdul Latif Birtai, whose work I really connected to. And that was just a starting point from like an interlibrary loan from like the South Asian library.
Use of all the library resources.
There we go.
Yeah, like that's how I got those books.
We have a librarian, so
And that's what brought me back to Pakistan was on my own terms of like, I want to go to Bulle Shah's Urs, his death celebration. I was like, okay, this is a start for me to connect to things that resonate with my own feelings and beliefs. And I started to I walked into like the National College of Arts, which is like a huge arts institution in Pakistan, and started to connect to arts community there. And ever since, I've done many different grassroots projects there, working with indigenous musicians and artists. But the National College of Arts has always been my starting point for finding human rights activists, for finding artists in different parts of the country, and connecting to people. That's a big part of creating the art, is not just sitting in isolation and creating something, but going and having lived experiences and learning from people and seeing firsthand, living life, seeing how different people live, trying to understand something about them, about their concerns, about what they're going through, as opposed to just coming from a place of privilege and assumption and approaching it. And so, trying to have humility about it, and talking to people and seeing if the things that I'm doing resonate with the people who they represent. And that's also been a really enriching part of the process. Without the people, there's no way that I would sit and work for years on a project in isolation, after work.
Well, that's burnout.
But it's the people. It's the people that make it important. It's the people that are the reason why, like, you keep going and you keep expressing, something about the beauty and the challenges what people are going through. And like when I was working on projects around Uyghurs, my thought was people just don't know about this situation. If they knew, they would certainly care. And so that was, something that really motivated me to kind of just, in my small way, create the art that I created about it. But then, and I'd been working on things related to like Palestine as well for many years. But when the most recent kind of like when it went to full-blown genocide in Gaza, that idea of if only people knew, they would care.
Right.
It is true, and yet it's not true enough. It is not enough to mobilize the number of people that are necessary to bring about that change as quickly as it needs to be brought about. But it did still mobilize so many more people, so many more protest movements, so many more people became activated and started to see the connections between the horrors that people are facing here in the US, as well as the horrors that people are facing in Gaza and what Uyghurs are facing, and just all over the world. And all of these different situations, people are starting to draw those connections. And I think that's something really powerful and hopeful to tap into.
Yeah, thank you. I want to connect some of this in my own experience. I think for me, I've been probably just to touch on the most recent expression for me of creativity, spirituality, and social concern. It kind of came out of asking out loud once without answering the question in front of an audience, what is folk music? It was a folk music event. Well, what is that? And I got to thinking about it later, and just my own roots in folk music and how much of it is actually storytelling about real people connected to issues of justice and injustice. and trying to actually come at that. Some of the most moving songs that I've ever heard from prior folk singers are stories of real people. Woody Guthrie once wrote a song about the sinking of a ship where 100 and something people died, and he told the name of every person in that song because telling their names was so important to him. Humanizing them was so important. And probably one of his most famous songs, Deportee, was inspired because migrant farm workers died in a plane crash, and the name of the crew was named in the newspaper report, and then it just said, and 28 Mexican nationals. And he was like, where are their names? And nobody knew their names. It was a long history of that. Anyway, the point being, I think this, for me, that connectivity of real human beings and humanizing real human beings, and that for me flows out of my own sense of spirituality and human nature, and then expressing that creatively. Those things have just been really at the forefront for me lately, the last year and a half or 2 years. So anyway, I'm resonating a lot as part of it's a different journey, but I'm resonating a lot with that. And I think the creativity part has been part of our conversation, and the concern for social justice, et cetera, has been part of our conversation so far. We've been sort of indirect about our conversations about spiritual things, except for your mention of some of the poets that you were interested in, and Bulleh Shah, for example. And that whole tradition, actually, in South Asian poetry which is profoundly spiritual, and not necessarily in a religious sense that most people might expect, but in deeply spiritual. I wonder if we could start exploring some of the spirituality and interspirituality connections of this a bit. I'm not sure yet how to go about that, but I just wanted to put that kind of back out there.
Well, one thing I was noticing was, I mean, and this isn't directly spiritual language, but the interconnection, when you're talking about relationships, the interconnections of people, both in your creative process, but also as you start referencing multiple things around the globe, there's there's a wider question of how does a compassionate and interconnected and realization of our compassionate interconnection shape engagement, which then is a space that everyone can kind of fill in the blank of how your own spiritual streams and inspirations would help you to address that. And I think there's so many different ways. So I'm curious what that is for you, but just to state, like, as you were saying that, I was like, okay, that's where there's room for something more to be going on than just any one person. Like, what's the groundswell of creative justice movement? Where's that coming from? Or where's it headed, kind of thing? You know?
So I think for me, like, when I look at spiritual practice, or I look at some of these poets that I really love, what I see is there are ideas that I have, and if I just go up to somebody and say, hey, this is my idea on, the situation in Gaza, or the history of the Vietnam War, or, like, U.S. Militarism and things, then what happens is, oftentimes what I've found is the person you're talking to, if they're not, receptive to the idea, if they find it, really, it pushes against their personal beliefs, then the reaction is they may just try to discredit you. It won't be about arguing that point. It'll be about, oh, but you're Muslim, that's why you're saying that. Or you're this, or you're that. Like finding
you, and
and just discrediting you as a person. Right? But what I found really fascinating is, if you look at the people that groups of people say that they think of as heroes, as important figures that are well respected, you can look at the things that they said and did, because a lot of times their legacy is very sort of sanitized. Dr. King is a wonderful example of that. Dr. King's, I Have a Dream speech is publicized, every year, as it should be. But in looking at more of Dr. King's writings and his speeches, just pick up the Vietnam speech, in which he so eloquently connects the civil rights movement to U.S. foreign policy and why those are not two separate things, because he had to explain his stance on the Vietnam War to the people that were actually already on his side about the civil rights movement, but people were like, wait, we were with you on that. Why are you bringing in the Vietnam War? What does this have to do with our movement? And so he made that speech, and it still resonates, as all of his speeches do to this day. But by bringing up the example of Dr. King's speech, it's not me saying those things.
Right.
I'm taking somebody who, like, almost every year, like on Dr. King Day, like I'll do like an illustration on him and, put something out there about that. And several times I've posted like a link to like the Vietnam speech, because coming from him, it's like, okay, well, you as in like the general folks that, I might be speaking to, respect him. But do you really listen to what he has to say? Do you really like take that in?
And the rest of the economic implications of how he saw
Exactly. Yeah. And so I find that a very powerful way of looking at religion. So why look at different religious traditions? Why look at different poets and things from history? Because if it's just me trying to say that I have these ideas, it'll just get shot down. But if we can look within our own cultural knowledge, the things that we love and hold dear, and we can find those examples that teach us these, I would say, universal truths, then I think they can be far more powerful, and they're a lot harder to deflect.
Right.
And so understanding who you're trying to communicate to and speaking in their language, whether it's their spirituality and religion or the types of leaders and things that they respect, I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you. Naz, what have you been thinking about over there?
A lot. I've been relating to a lot of what Adnan has shared, especially with experiences, because I'm also South Asian, and being disconnected from my culture a little bit, like early in life. I've shared more of the positive experiences of growing up in a mixed, like religious communities. When I was like really young in previous episodes, I may not have shared the more negative aspects of growing up and also facing being othered. Maybe maybe being South Asian, people don't know how to categorize you sometimes, especially being South Asian Muslim. It's just like out of maybe genuine ignorance on other people's parts. But also not liking my culture for a very long time because I've been exposed to...
you yourself not liking...
Yeah, because it was like othered. I was also personally exposed to more of the patriarchal parts of the culture. So I'm just bringing the gendered aspect into it.
Absolutely.
Also not liking those parts, but then going to college and just engaging with scholarship and studying anthropology just opened up my entire world to not just my own cultures, but finding connections between other cultures and actually seeing the bigger picture of the world is actually much more interconnected than how we're presented when we're younger with maybe misinformation or information being left out of our classrooms and textbooks. I think it was through like an Asian American fictions class where I learned more about Asian American history and seeing that connected to other communities in America. Also just finding out just more about things that we didn't learn in school. But in addition to that, what I was learning and then connecting it back to storytelling. So growing up, my mother would not identify as a storyteller, but I think she was very much a storyteller. And kind of acknowledging that part of my growing up too. I feel like I don't acknowledge that enough. So we have a garden. And so I would help my mom pick things, harvest things from our garden. And she would just go into story mode, remembering a memory or something. And then we'd clean the vegetables. And she'd go into story mode. And like, I'm hearing these stories, I remember details, but I kind of have no context for it. So going to college, finding out more about culture, and then contextualizing those stories from when I was younger. I don't know. It just kind of amazing connecting, again, the research I was doing to my mother's storytelling, which she would probably say is not storytelling, it's just sharing her life.
Yeah. But that's storytelling.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was just resonating with like a lot of what you were saying with experiences and just learning. And I think we do learn informally through storytelling as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
That's what was going on through my head.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I know earlier in the podcast you had said I might talk later, so I just wanted to not forget that might be there. So thank you. Yeah. I feel like I haven't been keeping track of time, actually. I feel like we're probably getting to a place where we need to transition a bit, and so I've been sitting here trying to think about how to best do that. And I wonder, I don't think we've ever done it this way before. Adnan, if you would, like, something that's going on right now in your creative and spiritual and social concern life, is there something right now that's just kind of at the forefront of all of that for you that you could share about? And we'll be putting into description notes and et cetera how to kind of find what you do. But if you want to say something about that, that's also okay too. You can shamelessly promote what you do.
Sure. So I think like a lot of the conversation, so thus far I've been talking about a lot of really challenging things and how that has inspired creating art. And I think I want to take a moment to talk about some of the things I'm doing right now, but to also talk about the joy of that, the healing aspect of doing that work and the sustaining aspect that it is for me. And so even in looking at tragedy, it's also thinking about like the art of what do I want to explore in this medium. In animation, I tend to use a lot of technology, but I also mix that with really old traditions. And so my films, they tend to look painterly. And so I created, processes to make them look like, painted animation. And then I also work in different mediums like traditional puppetry from Rajasthani Kathputli. And I work with traditional musicians. And so there's a joy in that music. There's a joy in that poetry and bringing that to life and taking what's written on a page that was written maybe centuries ago and finding that, and not that it's not available to people, it is available, but when you shine a light on it and do something new with it, with collaboration with these contemporary musicians who are folk musicians who carry like the oral traditions of the poetry, and then you see like the lived experiences of these artists and you put your own feelings, the positive and negative, into that mix, and you create something beautiful out of it. And you're playing with the beauty of like experimenting with liquid on glass animation to create these abstract, beautiful kind of space scenes of nebulas and things like that. And you just get into like the process of, look at this beautiful handmade puppet. And how can I add lights to it to make it look beautiful? How can I add, found objects from around the home to create this beautiful palace scene? And talk about like a story that is about class struggle. But I can also enjoy the beauty of that puppetry.
Just on its own.
Yeah. And just like, that's really important. Like it can't just all be misery. Even if you're expressing something about it, it's also about human dignity. It's about enjoying the mediums, the practice, the history of what it is that you're working with. And so that's a big part of what I do, is just like delving into that and exploring. And it can be agonizing at times because you feel like everything that you're creating doesn't live up to the idea that you had, the feeling that you wanted to convey. So that's a process. But once you get there, it's something really powerful. It's like, oh, I was able to do that. It didn't come right away. And then, many of these things, it's like for years, you're going back and forth, and then you have other life responsibilities, but you keep coming back to these projects because they mean something to you. And there's a real satisfaction in exploring that art and exploring like the best writing that you can do, the best drawing that you can do, and the best animation and puppetry and all of that, is so important and is joyful. And It's something that keeps me connected to the people and practices and why this is more than just like spreading misery.
Right, right.
You know, it's really creating art. And so one of the projects I'm working on right now is with an organization called Asians in Animation, and they're a wonderful nonprofit. And I was able to join their development lab in the fall as a co-director of a short animated film. And so that's given me an opportunity to work with a whole group of incredible artists and production folks. And the story that we pitched several stories. They were all meaningful in different ways. And I was hoping that this one would be chosen, and it was. And it's a story of a boy in Yemen. And our writer is half Yemeni. And so that way, you know, he can keep us true to the story. But it's such a wonderful process to work with this diverse group of artists. And they're all interested in and value this idea of amplifying voices that are not often heard. And so to be able to co-direct this project with my wonderful co-director and a wonderful group of artists to kind of help shape and mold this story of representation, but also just of beauty, of humanity, is something that's really special to kind of pull all those threads together with these incredible collaborators. So that's something I'm really enjoying these days.
Thank you. Thank you. Where can people find you and find your work? And we'll put it in the description notes as well. But
Thank you. So I have a website, and it's just madguru.com.
MADGURU.
That's correct. MADGURU.com. And you can find links to all the stuff that I do. There's so much work that I've done with musicians of like translating their words and poetry and just putting videos together, mixing their music and creating videos of like the music recording sessions that we've done. And there's all these animated films that I've created and more that you can check out there.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So check it out. I've barely scratched the surface. So looking forward to more of that. As we get ready to say goodbye for now for this episode, just a reminder, please, we'd love to hear from you, how you yourself are processing any of the things that we've been talking about today, spirituality, creativity, the connection with social concern and activism. So please do comment, subscribe, like, etc. Tell people about it. But I think in closing, in addition to all of that, I'd like to just kind of highlight words that I've heard Adnan say several times repeatedly throughout our time together. Words like beauty and beautiful, wonderful, typically related to other people that you're working with. Joy, play has fallen in there a few times. So we've been talking about very serious things, and we treat spirituality and creativity seriously sometimes, and certainly social justice issues are serious. But I think this reminder at the end, thank you for that, of joy and beauty, and something that's wonderful means it's full of wonder, which reminds me of embracing mystery and wonder. So please tell us how you're doing that as well and where you're finding joy. And thank you all for being here. Thank you again, Adnan, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. See you next time.